All right, so every once in a while, a new show comes out where I'm sitting there the whole time going, why am I not hearing more people talk about that? And this has happened again with HBO, A24, and Robert Downey Jr.'s new show, The Sympathizer. So for those of you at home who haven't heard about this show, I'm going to give my spoiler-free thoughts, a recommendation, and then for those who have seen the show, I'm going to get into some spoiler talk towards the end of the video. So for those who haven't heard, this show is directed by Park Chan-wook, who recently did The Handmaiden, as well as the incredible film Oldboy, and it is telling the story of a Vietnamese man who's playing both sides of the Vietnam War, both the South and the North, with allegiances to the Viet Cong as well as America. And so far, minus a few things here and there, this show is absolutely fantastic. First off, what a dream collaboration, A24 and HBO. They previously teamed up on Euphoria, but this show serves as a great example of what both of them are capable of as studios. You've got HBO's massive TV production budget, you've got A24's sort of indie artistic sensibility shining through as well, and as a result, we've got a mini-series that so far genuinely feels like a film broken up into 7 parts. A lot of times people talk about how TV shows lately feel like movies, but I genuinely don't think I've seen a TV show that feels more like a movie. Yes, everyone said Game of Thrones felt like a movie level production. I kind of disagree. I do feel like at times I could feel like that was a show.
You want a good girl, but you need the bad pussy.
However, this feels like a movie broken up, and part of this is helped by the sheer amount of screen time Robert Downey Jr. is given. They got access to Robert Downey Jr., who outside of Marvel is really hard to pin down. He recently won the Oscar for Oppenheimer, but aside from that, he's really selective with his projects, and boy, do they use Robert Downey Jr. So minus spoilers, what they do with Robert Downey Jr. here is insane. So basically the main character, who is only referred to as the captain, he is the sympathizer, right? He understands both sides. He is retelling his time where he was torn between two allegiances. And he's an unreliable narrator, so various times he'll go, actually, I've got that wrong, and the screen will kind of like rewind.
No. My Ferrari was white like Don Johnson's in Miami Vice.
So feeding in visually to this unreliable narrator concept, whenever the captain has a flashback revolving around a substantial white American man, they are played by Robert Downey Jr. So pretty much each episode introduces a different version of Robert Downey Jr. So in one episode, Robert Downey Jr. is playing Claude, a CIA agent. In another episode, Robert Downey Jr. is playing a racist college professor. In another episode, he's playing a director. Episode 4 basically feels like an hour-long Once Upon a Time in Hollywood style movie, where Robert Downey Jr. is playing a Vietnam War film director, and it's totally fascinating. But I can't talk about this show without talking about the lead performance of the captain. This guy is fantastic. He's Australian, he's come out of nowhere, and he's completely crushed it. This is a really complex role emotionally and performance-wise, and at first I felt like it was a little too reserved and a little thin, but as the show's carried on, I feel like he's a really captivating screen presence, and it's really fun kind of trying to figure out what he's thinking and what he's feeling. On top of that, Sandra Oh is in this show, and she's a fantastic addition. This is probably the best I've seen her. I know everyone loved her in Killing Eve, but I think she's absolutely astounding here. There are also a few cameos that pop up here and there that I do not want to spoil at all, but keep your eyes peeled. The last thing I'm going to talk about in my spoiler-free section are the visuals of this show. I cannot stress to you enough how much this looks like a fantastic film. The transitions in this show are almost obnoxiously good. Throughout this show, someone will light a cigarette and then it will slowly transition into fireworks. TikTok would have an absolute field day with this show if they actually discovered it. That whole Breaking Bad ketchup transition has nothing on the transitions in this show. I cannot stress to you enough how visually aesthetic, appealing, and satisfying to watch this show is. And there's this great visual punchline with an egg in episode 2, which I'll get into in my spoiler section, but I absolutely loved it. Like I was like genuinely trying not to laugh at what a great visual gag this was. But yeah, basically, if you're interested in this show, if you're interested in the subject matter of the Vietnam War and sort of espionage storytelling, this is a strong recommendation. Now, if you're not interested in these ideas, I feel like it could go 50-50. The first 2 episodes are a bit kind of slow and confusing, and there's not too much character stuff to latch onto, but I would implore you to stick with it, because by episode 4, I genuinely think this is must-watch television. A24, HBO, Robert Downey Jr., all the cast, Sandra Oh, the lead, the captain, are all crushing it. This is fantastic. Next, for those of you who are actually watching the show, we are going to get into spoilers. If you have not seen the show, watch it, come back. Let's just talk about some things I've absolutely loved about the storytelling. First off, the first episode really does throw you into the thick of it, but that end sequence where they're running for the plane, absolutely harrowing, properly intense, really well done. The transitions in that first episode, again, absolutely incredible. And I love the whole sequence. I love the whole sequence where the captain was getting physically violent with the Viet Cong captor, the female that he was interrogating. And I love the way the show communicated the fact that they were on the same side without explicitly spelling it out for us. Episode 2 had some really good stuff, but I do have to say, I think in the entirety of the show, I think this was the weakest episode. However, we are introduced to Sandra Oh, which was fantastic. We are also introduced to the concept that Robert Downey Jr. is playing multiple characters, and I absolutely loved the humor in him playing that racist caricature. I also loved the twisted, weird backstory we get about his mum and the time he basically fucked a fish. That was absolutely insane and very Park Chan-wook if you've seen Old Boy. I was really happy to see those sort of weird, twisted elements brought back into his filmography. There was some really great visual storytelling here with his brother who is grieving the loss of his wife and baby. I did love the whole sequence where he's basically traumatized and punching his head the way he was as he was watching his wife and baby get buried in the casket. Really effective, haunting visual storytelling. Episode 3 though, I was sitting there by the end of episode 2 going, oh, I'm not sure about the pacing. I'm not sure I've emotionally connected with this show the way I want to. Episode 3 knocks it out of the park. First off, we get this incredible sequence where 4 Robert Downey Jr.'s are on screen. So as I mentioned in the spoiler-free section, Robert Downey Jr. is basically meant to play all white American characters, and I think it's meant to be indicative of the way the captain looks back in his memory and just kind of looks back at American racism and racist people in America as all kind of the same beliefs, the same twisted ideology. But just a super, super fascinating sequence. But this episode's crowning achievement is this whole extended 30-40 minute plot line of the captain basically having to kill someone who is suspected of being the mole. Now, obviously, the main character is the mole, but unfortunately, the major has been accused of being the mole, and in order to protect his secret identity, the captain must kill the major. And this is sad, this is harrowing, this is effective. I love how drawn out the actual assassination planning and sequence is. It really makes you feel the dread and confusion, and I love how haunting some of the visuals are in this episode, particularly in the end where all the Robert Downey Jr.'s are at this escort bar and he's just having these haunting flashbacks of the friend he had to kill. An absolutely astounding sequence. Also, I must say, seeing all 4 of these Robert Downey Jr.'s hanging out and talking gives this really eerie, uncanny valley like nightmare feeling, and it reminds me a lot of Alex Garland's Men when she goes to the bar and all of them are played by that same creepy dude. There's a lot of humor and comedy in this show and the way Robert Downey Jr. carries himself and performs, but I do find these sequences genuinely eerie and uncomfortable, and I wonder if that's intentional. I wonder if we're meant to sit there and as an audience kind of feel this inherent discomfort, similar to what victims of racism feel, this sort of discomfort in these situations. Episode 4 though, holy shit, yeah, you do just get a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood style movie where basically the main character, the captain, is consulted by yet another version of Robert Downey Jr., this one being the film director, and he's brought on as the Vietnamese consultant. Basically, this show is interrogating itself, it's also interrogating America and its relationship to the Vietnam War, as well as Hollywood's part in the glamorization or critique of the Vietnam War and how America treated the Viet Cong and the Vietnamese people in general. A lot of this episode is centered around the morality and the ethics of America recreating the horrors they inflicted upon Vietnam during the war in cinema in Hollywood, whether this is perceived as a celebration or an actual proper critique. And Robert Downey Jr.'s director character clearly gets joy and some weird artistic pride in recreating the most horrific events. I absolutely love the sequence where Robert Downey Jr.'s director character basically assumes, but also assumes correctly, that the captain's mother was assaulted by a Frenchman, and as a result he feels it's totally justified to recreate these sort of scenes in his war movie with no regard for the well-being of the actors mentally. It creates a really fascinating discussion about how productive this sort of art is when it is soaking itself in this much explicit trauma, and whether the ends sort of justify the means, or whether this is lost on the American audience, and whether the actual creators of this sort of art get lost in the source. We see Robert Downey Jr.'s director character kind of come into the piece with a really good moral structure, but by the end of the episode he is completely twisted and clearly just wants to see suffering and pain on screen for kind of the perverse voyeuristic joy that comes from that. This results in a really fantastic scene where the captain actually loses it and interferes with the film's production. Earlier in the episode, there's this fantastic moment where basically using one of the prop gravestones, the captain actually makes a replica of his mother's tombstone that he can kind of pray to and pay tribute to his mother. Even though this is a fake tombstone of his mother, he treats it as real. The symbolism is there and the meaning is there for him. This is a really great juxtaposition to what the female actress was saying to him that was willingly going to be a part of the assault scene when she says to him, "It's just film, it's not real, why do you care?" Again, smash cutting to basically the prop tombstone that he was authentically praying to is really effective visual storytelling. Speaking of visual storytelling, I do just want to circle back to the transitions. I mentioned earlier there was a hilarious transition to do with an egg in the show. As I was saying before, this show is full of absolutely unreal transitions. Really just striking transitions where you're like, how did they actually pull that off? And then in episode 2, out of nowhere, there's this section where he's just being interviewed by someone and their head out of nowhere, like no transition, just hard cuts to an egg, and then it transitions to a shot with eggs. It's absolutely hilarious. It feels like this intentional visual joke of like, I know you've been really impressed by how smooth our transitions are, now we're going to do a totally clunky, obnoxious one. Now again, I don't think this is because they're failing. Obviously this is intentional and could also be a play on how he sees this character and how much of an egghead and idiot this guy is. All these transitions and this show's visual style really do a good job of getting you through the slower, plottier, kind of harder to understand moments of the show. It keeps things interesting. Even if you're not connecting with certain characters or certain emotional beats, how can you not be enthralled by a show that is this visually stunning? Again, I don't think I've seen a show be more like a movie than this show. Genuinely, this is absolutely unreal television. I'm really impressed. It did lose me in the second episode slightly, but by the end of episode 4, I mean, once a week as well, I can't wait. We've got 3 more episodes, so if you're not watching this show, I do strongly suggest checking it out if the subject matter interests you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll do weekly videos as episodes come out moving forward, so please subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more, and thank you so much for watching.